Hey guys, hope you're doing well today. In today's video I'm going to give you the final update for this low tech fishbowl aquascape setup. This aquascape has been running for about 1 year now, and for a setup that's not using any fertilizers, CO2 or even a filter, it's done really well. The plants have grown pretty healthily despite all that. They filled up the aquascape pretty well, but now I feel like it's time for a change and a little refresh of this fishbowl. I also want to try and grow some new plant species too. Hopefully I get some nice healthy plant growth using this setup. The reason why I feel like it's time for a change in this aquascape is because I can't see this scape evolving any further. One of the joys of keeping a planted tank is seeing how the plants grow and develop over time, but eventually things will slow down and start to stabilise. But before I rescape this fishbowl, I feel like it's a good idea to show you guys how I'm going to tear down this fishbowl. I think it will be interesting to show you guys this little behind the scenes process of aquascaping. The first thing I'm going to do is remove some of the water just to make it a little bit easier. I don't want to have too much water movement when I'm trying to get the fish and shrimp out the bowl, otherwise it's just going to get really messy really quickly. Now that some of the water has been removed from the fishbowl, I'm going to try and get as many guppies out as I can. An issue I had is that I don't have a small net, so I'm having to use this larger net, which makes the whole process a little bit more difficult. And it doesn't help that there's a lot of hardscape in the middle of the fishbowl. This made it really hard to try and manoeuvre the net around the bowl to get the fish out. So I decided to change up my plan a little bit. I decided to take out the plants in the hardscape instead. This will then give me a little bit more space to manoeuvre the net around the fishbowl. I decided to get some of the Bucephalandra out first. You can see as I'm pulling out some of the Bucephalandra, their roots got really stuck onto the hardscape. They really did secure themselves to the rocks over time. Another plant that has done really well in this setup has been the Trident. This Trident came from my jungle aquascape aquarium. I took some small plantlets that was growing from the main mother plant in the tank, and then I used some super glue to attach them to a rock so they wouldn't float away. I wish it grew a little bit taller so it could fill the back of the fishbowl. So now I'm going to remove the Hydrocotyle Tripartita mini Japan. I had a decent growth rate from this plant, but it did grow pretty tall and scraggly for me. I think this is mainly due to the lack of CO2 and fertilizers. Also, not having intense lighting probably didn't help either. To get more compact growth, I heard pressurized CO2 and high lighting really helps a lot. This will make the plant grow a bit more lower and more densely. When the plant is in this kind of environment, it also kind of acts as a carpeting plant too. Now it's time to remove the hardscape. I planted a lot of Bucephalandra on the hardscape. By having Bucephalandra attached to the hardscape, it gives the aquascape kind of a more mature aged kind of look. I also think having plants attached to the hardscape just makes it look a little bit more interesting to look at. I went to Aquarium Gardens a few weeks ago and they had some amazing aquascapes there. A lot of the aquascapes featured hardscape with lots of epiphyte plants growing off them. Epiphyte plants are like your Bucephalandra, Anubias or Javafern. It just made the hardscape look a lot nicer and stand out a lot more in the aquascape. So I think I'm going to reuse my hardscape so I can get some more mature growth for my Bucephalandra on it. And this will also make the aquascape look a little bit more mature from the start. You can see here as I'm pulling out the hair grass from the substrate, the roots are really clung onto the substrate really well. So as I pull the plant out of the substrate, it's going to disrupt some debris from the substrate, which is going to make the water cloudy and dirty. This is going to make it a lot harder to get the shrimp and fish out the bowl. So my plan at the moment is to remove much of the hair grass as I can, along with some of the hardscape that's still left in there. There's still a few pieces of dragonstone buried in the substrate that needs to be taken out. You can see the water in the bowl's got really murky now. Right now there's a lot of debris and detritus floating around in the water column. Hopefully in about half an hour the debris and detritus will settle down to the bottom of the substrate. This will make the water a little bit less murky and make it easier to get the fish and shrimp out the bowl. You can see now that I let the water settle down for about half an hour, the water cleared up a little bit. Now with no hardscape or plants or anything in the way, I can start netting out the fish a lot easier. Since the bowl is round, it has curved edges which makes it a lot harder to net things out. So to get things out I have to almost like scoop them out of the bowl. It's not the most ideal situation, but it kind of worked. While I'm rescaping the bowl, I put the fish and shrimp into a little bucket. For a few hours to a day they should be just fine. There's even an air stone in there so they have plenty of oxygen. I also started to take out a little bit more water too. I found when I was taking water out using the jug it kind of created a little vacuum effect. This ended up pulling the fish and shrimp into the jug, and it seemed to be working as a better method to pull the shrimp and fish out the fishbowl. It made it especially easier to catch all the baby shrimp as well that were in the bowl. As I'm removing water from the bowl, I thought I'd give you some tips on how to make a good fishbowl aquascape. I think a good place to start off is the substrate. I recommend using a high quality aquasoil based substrate. Substrates like the ADA aquasoils or even the Tropicus substrate is a really good choice. This type of aquasoil substrate is packed with nutrients. This is especially useful if you don't plan to use any fertilizers in your aquascape. The plants will get a lot of nutrients from the roots which are in the substrate. This will help them to grow really healthily. Also, aquasoil based substrates have another ability. They can also help to fix nutrients that are in the water column into the soil. This will help to prolong the life of the soil, and it will also help to provide more nutrients to the plants for their roots too. My next tip will be to keep up with the water changes. Water changes are super important, especially in planted setups. They help to remove any excess nutrients that are in the water column. This is really important, especially if you're not planning on using a filter too. The water changer will help to keep the fish healthy, and it will also help to stop any algae from growing. If algae finds a way to establish itself in a fishbowl, it can be very difficult to get rid of. This was an issue I had in the first month of setting up this fish bowl aquascape. I had a massive algae outbreak in the bowl and it took me a lot of work to get rid of it. There was a lot of manual removal of algae and trimming the plants back pretty harshly, along with a ton of water changes too. I even had to do a blackout on the bowl, which is quite an extreme process to do to get rid of algae. A blackout involves blocking any light from reaching your aquarium for a few days. This is a way to stop algae from growing by trying to stop it from photosynthesizing. This method is quite hit and miss for me. Whenever I had to try this technique out for my planted tanks, it's usually about a 50% success rate. After a successful blackout, there'll be a lot of dead algae in the water column. The decaying algae will use up quite a lot of oxygen and it will also release nutrients into the water column. If the oxygen content in your water column starts to dip too low, then it can stress out the fish and shrimp in your setup. So doing a water change after a blackout will help to reduce this problem. And my final tip for fish bowl aquascapes is that you have to be really patient. When you have a setup that has no CO2, fertilizers or even flow, plants aren't going to grow really quickly. It's going to take a long time for some plants to grow, especially if you try to have more difficult species in your bowl. For the first 2 months I didn't really have much growth at all. Most of the plants in my fish bowl were quite slow growing plants. Plants like the Trident and Bucephalandra don't really grow too quickly anyway. So now that most of the water has been removed from the fish bowl, we only have the substrate left. I'm going to be using a jug to remove most of the substrate from the fish bowl. For the rescape, I'm going to keep some of this substrate and add it back in. Over the past year, the substrate has become accumulated with friendly bacteria. This friendly bacteria is what breaks down ammonia into less harmful compounds. So by using it in the rescape, we'll help to see the new fresh substrate. This will then overall help to keep the water parameters more stable. That's pretty much it now. The aquascape's been teared down. The last thing I got left is just to clean the bowl a little bit. I want to make sure the glass is nice and super clean for the rescape. You can see there's some built up algae growth on the sides of the bowl. It was really hard to clean these areas of the bowl. Sometimes the hardscape gets in the way, so it makes it really difficult to get the toothbrush around those areas to clean it. Also, some of this algae built up in areas underneath the substrate, and I didn't really want to move the substrate to clean these areas. You saw earlier what happened when I tried to disrupt the substrate a little bit. The water would have just gone really murky and it would have made a big mess of the aquascape. To give the bowl a final good clean, I'm going to take it outside and clean it with a hose pipe and toothbrush so it's ready for the rescape. Here's the final result. You can see the bowl's looking super clean now. It almost looks like a brand new bowl. I think from this video it shows you guys how much effort it is to tear down an aquascape. Overall, this whole process took me about 2 hours to do. The thing that took the longest was trying to get the fish and shrimp out of the bowl. Taking out the plants, hardscape and substrate were pretty quick, so I'm glad it didn't take too long to do that. So this was the first thing we needed to do before we rescaped the fish bowl. I got all the new plants and substrate ready for the rescape. It's taken me quite a while to decide what I wanted to do with this rescape, but I finally think I figured it out now. I'm going to be doing the rescape this week, and I'll be uploading that video next week for you guys. So if you enjoyed this video, please can you give it a like. Also, if you want to see that rescape video as soon as I post to the channel, please subscribe, it really helps me out a lot.